Hello everyone and welcome to this Chess Secrets video. This is the fourth episode featuring tactics and pattern recognition, which are two areas that can greatly improve your chess. They are secrets that, well-known secrets that good players use. They improve their ability in tactics by studying tactics and practicing problem solving, improving their calculation ability. But the more they do this, the more patterns they will see and be able to recognize those patterns. So it's kind of like a shortcut in chess, where the more of these different patterns that you see and can recognize and know what to do in those positions, the more it will help you improve your chess. So this position here features a common theme that you may see often. Some of you may have not seen this, but many are probably familiar with a position like this. So white to move, what would you do in this position? So take a look at this, pause the video if you need to. But keep this set up, this position in mind, and I'll get back to this later in the video, and I want to show some pieces of just patterns and tactics that can be used in this position, and hopefully after we go over those, you'll be able to solve this position much easier. So let's get to the very first problem here. Let's see. And just remember, I'll get back to this, but what we're about to use or show you will help you be able to solve this position. Okay, so in this example here, white to move, what would you do here? Take a look at this position. Hopefully it won't be too difficult for you. And some of you, it should be very easy. But take a look at this, pause the video if you need more time. But what would you do in this position? What is white's best move here? All right, let's take a look. The evaluation says, of course, that there is a mate in 1. So if we look at this, there is a mate in 2 checking with this bishop here, but the knight and queen are already up here close to the king, and the queen can do the job here with queen to g7. So just a quick little mate in 1 there. So this is a little pattern, a little mating tactic to remember here, this kind of setup where the king is stuck in the middle. We see that the pawn, the pawn is covered by the knight, but the rook here and the queen, they're preventing this king from running away, and also this pawn. So the king is just trapped in the middle. Okay, now building off of this little mate in 1, we'll go to the next example here. All right. So problem 2. Now, using what you learned in the first example, what would you do here in this position? So take a look at it, and at any time, if you need to pause the video, feel free to do that. And if you're ready, we will move on here. So the evaluation says that now there's a mate in 2. And hopefully you were able to find that after remembering that first little position. So this shouldn't be too difficult, hopefully. Once again, you could have tried bishop to a3, and there's a mate in 3, but the quickest way is queen to h8 here. And now the only move is for the king to retreat, and now mate, and he's stuck in the middle here, this same position that we just looked at. All right, so keeping this in mind, we'll build on this further. So let me turn off these lines, and we'll look at the third example here. Okay, so now what should white do in this position? How does he go about forcing the win here. So take a look at this. At any time, pause if you need to. If not, let's move on. All right, a mate in 3. So the quickest way is queen to h7 here. And now the king is forced to the only place he can go, f8. And then we have queen to h8. And once again, he's forced down here to e7, allowing queen captures with mate. All right, so hopefully by reinforcing this pattern and going over it multiple times, it'll help burn this into your memory, and hopefully you'll be able to more easily remember it in the future if you see a pattern similar to this. But we'll build on it more as we go deeper into this position and until we see how it was used in a game. All right, so let's take a look at example number 4. All right, once again, white to move here. And how should white proceed? What should white do here to go for the win? All right, pause if you have to. If not, let's take a look. And hopefully you found this mate in 4. And queen to h5 here. Check. So now the only move possible is for the king to go to g8. And then we have queen to g7, or excuse me, queen to h7, chasing the king to f8, the only possible move, queen to h8, and once again the king is stuck in the middle with mate on g7. Okay, so I hope you're getting the idea here, and now we'll go a little further and look at the next position here. And once again, white to move. What should white do? Take a look at this, and hopefully you'll learn from the previous positions, and that'll help you figure out what to do in this position. All right, so pause if you want to look at it further. If not, let's take a look. A mate in 5. All right, and the best way to go about it, and this is something important to remember. A lot of beginners might want to move here to h7 and check immediately and drive the king to the center and then run up here. But the black king would be able to escape in here and kind of buy time. So what needs to be done is capturing on f7 to drive the king back to h8, where you can go to h5 and check. And now the king will move. And by doing this, you keep checking the king and keep him on the run the whole time. So he goes to f8, queen to h8, and back into the center here with a mate on g7. All right, so I hope this is helping to build each little pattern onto a slightly more complicated pattern and help burn this into your memory. Okay, so now let's go to the next problem here. Okay, once again, white to move. How should white proceed? And hopefully you can figure it out from the previous positions that we showed on the board. So as always, pause if you need to. If not, let's take a look. So here it is not a mate, but if we look at the lines, now this is something important to note. If we continue as we did before, we would just go queen to h5. And most of the time your opponent would try and make room by moving the rook over. But there's another resource that black has, and that's to bring this bishop to e4 and cover this h7 square. So it looks like the computer recommends queen to d3. to attack this h7 square. Normally the queen would just jump up here to h5 and then threaten to move here. But if that is played, well, then the bishop could block here. But if we go with the theme that we looked at earlier, we would just go here. And then if the normal rook move was played, well, then you could start this whole sequence. Queen captures on f7, the king's forced to h8, check on h5, the king has to move to g8, then you can go to h7, and the king is forced to f8, queen to h8, and the king would be stuck again in the center. So if we go back to that initial position and we look at this queen to h5 move, if this bishop move is played, well, then that prevents the queen from moving up here and delivering a mate. But the bishop would just be captured, and according to the computer, white is ahead about +2.5 in this position. So that should be a pretty good advantage. It looks like the best move recommended would be to follow up with f6 here. And then we have, it looks like bishop to a3 as the best move, lining up on the rook. And this should give white a pretty healthy advantage. And he's ahead of pawn. So if we go back once again to the very beginning before that queen moves, it looks like queen to d3 is an even better move, because now if that bishop moves here to e4, you can just capture, and then you're still threatening this mate over here. So probably maybe an opponent could try this, but then if they move to g6, you could slide over to h3 here, and then you're still threatening a mate up there on h7. So the computer recommends to just capture right here, and then after bishop captures, well, then black is just down their queen there. So that should be a winning advantage for white. All right, well, let's take a look at the next example here. Let me make sure I turn off these lines and evaluations. All right, so example number 7. All right, so what would you do in this position here? Hopefully, after building from the previous examples, you should be able to figure it out. But here we show white is ahead 3.5, and it looks like knight to g5 is the best move. And in this position, after knight to g5, there are different options, and I'll go over those later. Instead of going back up to g8, the king could move to h6 or g6 as well. H8 would be bad, because then the queen could just move up with check and then mate on the next move. But if we follow the previous pattern of the king moving up here to g8, well, then we get back to that position where queen to d3 is recommended. But even if queen to h5 is played, they either have to give up their bishop, or if they try and make room, then we go back to that pattern here of check, the king is forced to the edge, check again, he moves, check, he tries to run, you check again, and then he's mated in the middle. And sometimes you'll see this pattern, and this bishop won't even be in this position to influence this diagonal, so you won't even have to worry about that. So if I go back to the next example, number 8. All right. So this was the initial position that I showed you at the beginning of the video. So what would you do here? And hopefully after looking at those other patterns, you'll be able to guess what the move is here to initiate this pattern. And some of you may be familiar with this. It's a pretty popular tactic and theme. And now pause the video if you want to look at it further, but if not, we'll take a look here. So white is ahead +3 and then some. But this is the bishop capturing on h7 sacrifice here. It's where you sacrifice a bishop on h7. This tactic or this pattern can also be known as the Greek gift, I believe. And basically, whenever you have a bishop lined up on h7 and they haven't moved that pawn, so you can capture that pawn, and then your knight would be able to quickly jump to g5 with check, and it's protected. Either nothing can capture it if this queen wasn't here attacking, but since the queen is attacking, a lot of times you have to make sure you have your c1 bishop guarding this diagonal and covering the knight when it jumps to g5. Sometimes if you have not castled, you could have a rook here on the h1 square, and you could push a pawn up here to h4 to cover this knight jump to g5. So that's a possibility sometimes. And you want to be able to follow up with a queen check, either on queen to d3 or queen to h5. And if you see those possibilities, and also make sure that the knight has been chased away. So this pawn has moved up here to e5, chasing away the f6 knight. And so that knight is not guarding this pawn. So hopefully you figured this out. It will allow you to sacrifice the bishop. And then if the king just doesn't capture, you could retreat and just be ahead a piece there. So let's see what the computer recommends. If the king does not capture, well, then it even recommends, well, you could retreat to c2 or d3, but the computer recommends knight to g5, jumping in there. So that's pretty interesting. If a pawn tries to attack, well, then the queen, or excuse me, the knight could jump in here and fork the rook and the queen. So that's a possibility as well. But normally the king will capture here, because if he doesn't, then he's just behind in material. But this allows the continuation in this pattern where the knight jumps into g5 with check. And in this position, the king most of the time will go back to g8. But if he does that and he's kind of restricted on his escape squares in the middle, well, then you could just follow up. And if he tries to make room, then just remember this capture here. The king retreats, you check, and this just allows you to start this little pattern where you're running after the king, you chase him into the middle, and then mate him here. So hopefully we've gone over this pattern enough times and it's burned into your memory pretty good. But also remember that back at the beginning here, after capture, after the king captures, and we attack here and the king retreats, just remember that if the bishop can run down here and try and guard this diagonal, that could change up the situation in this position. So here it looks like queen to d3 is recommended. because now, if that bishop would just go here, you could capture. Now you're threatening mate in 1 here. So if this block were tried, well, then you could just go to h4. And now you're threatening a mate in 1 up here on h7. If the rook tried to move, well, then you could go to h7 and then mate on f8. So it looks like here the queen is forced to capture. And so then after this position, the bishop could just capture, and you're just ahead enough material that you should be winning in this position. All right, well, now before I end the video, I will go over the actual game where this position occurred, and we'll see what happened in the game. All right, so let's take a look. In this game, white began with d4, a good solid move, and black responded with e6 here, which is not as common, but it'll transpose into more common lines. So now white is kind of setting up for a queen's gambit position, and now after this, a good move. It helps control the center. It prevents white from immediately bringing that e4 pawn up. So white brings in the knight to c3, which will allow him to push his pawn to e4. But now there's a pin on that knight, so the pawn cannot go up to e4 here, or the knight would just capture because this knight is pinned to the king. So e3 was played instead, and then we have b6. So because this this pawn is on a light square, and this one has not even moved, this bishop's kind of blocked in, and so that bishop could become a problemed bishop in this position. And so a lot of times black will fianchetto the bishop and try and activate it over here on b7 or even a6 sometimes. So bishop to d3 is played, just developing the bishop and lining up here on that h7 square. And so now black develops his bishop, threatening to capture here on g2 and attack the rook on h1. So the knight moves up here to block that attack. Black just castles, white castles, and now we have d5 finally being played here. So white responds by capturing this more valuable central pawn with a slightly less valuable pawn on the side here. So capture, and then before recapturing that pawn, this bishop captures the knight, and then we have another capture, a recapture, and now the knight moves in here. But the only problem with this, I guess black didn't want to block in his own bishop with a pawn on this light square, but now we'll see this knight get chased across the board. So e4 is played, and now it moves back to f6. So I should turn on the evaluation in the lines here. We already see that white is ahead by almost +2. If I go back here, it looks like the best move would have been knight to e7, and that would have still only given white a half a pawn advantage, but it wouldn't have led to this problem of knight to f6 and the pawn jumping up here to e5 and chasing this knight back. And this also activates this light squared bishop. And so now we're in that position where the bishop is lined up on h7, the knight can jump up to g5 with check, the queen can jump out here to h5 or d3, and this bishop is backing up the knight moving to g5. So now we begin this Greek gift or bishop to h7 sacrifice. So the bishop captures the pawn. The king captures to try and stay ahead in material. If we go back, it looks like that is the best move to capture that bishop. Otherwise, black would just be behind even more. So capture, the knight follows up with a check, and it looks like king to g8 is the best move in this position. But in the game, king to g6 was played. So another option that I'll look at real quick is sometimes king to h6 could be played, but that would be bad in most situations, especially in this one, as knight captures on f7 would have a double discovered check, where the bishop and the knight are both checking the king, and when this knight moved, it leads to a discovered check by this bishop. And we also have a fork on the king and the queen. So here, the queen could just be captured after the king moves out of check. So, that is definitely something to watch for. And, if your opponent moves to h6 or you're in trouble and you're trying to survive in a position like this, usually h6 is not good for the king to go there. So, let's take a look at what happened in the game. Instead of king to g8, we had king to g6 in the game. So now the game continued with queen to g4 here, lining up on the king, although the computer recommends rook to e1, which that may be a harder move to find. I'll take a look at it real quick here. So the computer said that rook to e1 would be the best move. And then now it recommends that black captures on e5. So this is a difficult computer line. You would think that, well, I don't know here. It just looks crazy. So I mean, if we follow the best line according to the computer, it recommends this, then rook captures, then knight to c6 is best, and then queen to g4. Oh, wait, it may have changed. So now it's recommending queen to d3 as best with check. And then after f5, rook takes e6. So, this is just pretty difficult stuff to... I would recommend, take a look at this on a board and play around with these positions. I won't go too much further into it, otherwise the video will be even longer. All right, so if we go back to queen to g4 in this position, so after, excuse me, I went back too far. So after we have bishop captures on h7, and the king captures, the knight jumps in with check, and king to g6. In the game, queen to g4 is played, and that still gives almost a +3 advantage. And black responded with f5, attacking the queen. And so here the queen just retreated back, which I believe was the best move according to the computer's evaluation. And then in the game, queen to e8 was played, which was the second best move. But by then, now white has a winning advantage, +4, almost 4.5. And the best move is rook to e1. But it looks like white did not see that, and instead played knight captures on e6 here with a discovered check by the queen. So the king had to move and moved up to f7 here. But now we have the best move was played, knight forking the queen and the rook here. So the game continued with queen to c8, attacking this knight, but really the knight could not be captured, because then if the knight is captured by the queen, there's the possibility of pushing this pawn to e6 with check and then attacking that queen, leading to a discovered attack on the queen, and so the queen could be captured. So black, kind of made a mistake here. He was already in trouble, and I think he just, fell even further because of the pressure of the position. So e6 is played now with check, and it's protected by the knight, and now the queen is just protecting this knight. So the king has to run, but now bishop to a3 is played. So once the the king moves, now, this bishop could capture the rook up here, the knight could capture this rook, and in this position, black resigned. So we could look at how maybe the game would continue. Let's see here. So after bishop to a3 check, the computer recommends king to f6. Maybe I looked at something different here. It looks like queen takes g7 was one of the recommended moves. So instead of that, bishop to a3. Oh, okay, let me go back here. All right, bishop to a3 and queen takes g7. It looks like they have the same evaluation, but with this queen capture instead, it kind of keeps the pressure on the black king. So now he would have to retreat, and then we have this knight moving out of here since it was just under attack. But maybe the knight's attacked again, but now e7 could be played, forking the king and the rook. The king has to move, but we have a capture promoting to queen. The knight captures, queen captures with check. The king starts running, but the queen can just check this king around the board. And so now there's just threats. An attack here. If the king captures, well, now the rook can capture, and the king would have to move, and the queen would be lost. So the queen can just block, but the rook would capture, and the game is pretty much over. This is one way the game could have resumed. If we look at the actual ending in the game, it looks like after king to f6, the computer recommends capturing on d7, attacking the queen, and the queen could capture, but then we have bishop captures here, and it looks like knight to a6 is the most recommended move. I guess attacking the knight here. So that would force this knight to move, and he would just capture the rook. And then now it recommends either queen to f7, attacking their bishop, or just capturing here on a8. So then rook at a to e1, just trapping the king on the edge here, threatening to check with this bishop, and maybe start attacking with the queen, and black is just in trouble, so it's no wonder he resigned. All right, this video is going on for quite a bit. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. Feel free to leave comments or suggestions, but remember to try and study some kind of tactics on a regular basis to improve your chess, and definitely learn to recognize patterns and look at the different patterns that come up often, checkmating patterns, forking patterns, but hopefully you'll remember this Greek gift or sacrifice on h7. Let me find it here where it began in the game. All right, I'll go back a few moves. So hopefully in this position, Whenever you have a bishop lined up on h7, a knight ready to jump in with check, but make sure it's protected by something like this bishop on c1, and your queen able to jump to d3 or h5 to follow up the attack. If those conditions exist, then you may have a good opportunity for this sacrifice on h7. So just keep that pattern in mind, and hopefully you'll be able to use it in some of your own games. All right, thank you everybody, and have a great day.